Carol Carter. I'm here with Lisa Wyckoff. We want to welcome you to the Global Minded Virtual 2020 conference event. And this week was originally going to be a pre-conference. And thanks to JC Wharton, who runs our rural equity team, we ended up doing one of the different hours every day this week. So we're delighted that you're here with us today. For those of you who don't have information on Global Minded, we are all about creating a capable and diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, underrepresented populations into the education, economic mobility, employment, and leadership pipeline. So we do that through our annual conference, which this year is virtual. And we have inclusive leader awards across 14 industry sectors. And we also have programs on different college campuses. So that's how we achieve our goals. And we are so delighted to cover the critical issues in rural this week. And it's my absolute pleasure, along with JC Wharton and Lisa, to introduce Ron Lessard. Ron is a Mohawk sun dancer. He is a Vietnam veteran. He served as Chief of Staff of the White House Initiative on American Indian and Alaskan Native Education from September 2013 to November 2016. And since then, he has served as the acting executive director. And we had the great pleasure to meet a few years ago in DC, and we have been working together ever since. So Ron, thank you so much. And I brought the talking sticks so that we can honor all of the amazing Native traditions and the incredible panel that you've brought today. So thank you to everybody, and we're looking forward to really a tremendous hour with you.
Well, thank you, Carol. Thank you so much. And thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Global Minded, for doing everything to have us take part in this really special time, certainly around the rural issues and education issues. Our people are resilient, and we show that. And this is a great opportunity to introduce you to some really wonderful people and some with an abundance of knowledge with everyone. I think I'm going to go in order of how we will be presenting today. So first will be Ava Rose Johnson. She's a student and a musician, and she won the Native American Music Awards winner. We have a treat for you. She's going to open that for us. After that will be Michael Chamberlain. Michael is the Special Assistant for Rural Outreach at the U.S. Department of Education. Then we'll have Diane Cournoyer, who is the Executive Director of the National Indian Education Association, and Carrie Billy, who is President and CEO of American Indian Higher Education Consortium. So we have a great group of people, and I think that you'll certainly enjoy this as we move forward and be very knowledgeable. Yes. Can we go forward? Okay. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ava. We're very excited that Ava could be with us today. We do this for our Native youth, and we're very excited that she was available. She's getting very busy with all the things that are going on in her life. And so I like her to, speak to you, have her do her song for us, and open it that way, and then have her talk about herself a little bit and things going on in her life, not only during the coronavirus, but certainly moving forward and looking to the future and things that can be done. So thank you, Ava.
Thank you so much for having me. So this song that I'm going to be singing is called Heaven's Window, and it's the song that I co-wrote with Sean Fuller, drummer for Florida Georgia Line, Billy Dawson, and Lainey Edwards, and it's in memory of my friend, Bear Place. So this is Heaven's Window. chairs and dads. Living, living, swinging, turning, and growing out your body. It was me at the on me. Just let the seconds on me, probably. Now it's just on me, she gets a fall on the knees. I can only breathe and the soul refuse. That is good without you. Fly high, I hope you find heaven's window. Swing it open wide and you hear this song. With you and I, and God knows not the end, no. Sit back and kick up your feet. Listen to the angels as they sing. I know one day we'll meet, but for now I know you're in good hands. I'm jealous of Jesus because he gets to see ya. Yeah, I really shouldn't be upset, but I just miss my friend. Flying high, I hope you find heaven's window. Swing it open wide and you hear this song. For you and I, and God knows not the end. Stand back and kick up your feet. Listen to the angels as they sing. Swing it open wide and you hear this song. Fly high up, open wide heaven's window. Swing it open wide and you hear this song. For you and I, and God knows nothing so. Sit back and kick up your feet. Listen to the angels as they sing.
Wow, thank you. That was fantastic.
Thank you so much.
So, that was really great, and thank you for doing that for us. You know, who knows, the next time we may have to pay for tickets to go into the also. So,
Next year,
thank you.
she's
So
going
if
to
you would
open
please,
up our dinner run. She's going to
yes,
open up the opening night dinner, and that's what was supposed to be happening this June. But
that's
next June.
that's fantastic. So, Ava, if you could tell everyone a little bit about yourself, certainly about your music, and we're so, proud of you for winning the music award. But just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then also about how you're doing with school and during this time of the coronavirus. And so, yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so my name is Ava Johnson, and I'm 13 years old. I am Osage and Cherokee. And a fun fact about my family, or a couple of fun facts about my family, is my great-grandmother and great-aunt are both Cherokee national treasures for basketry. And my great-great-grandfather was an original Lautee for the Osage Nation. He was one of the original tribal members that received head rights. And also, there are only 6 full-bloods left of the Osage Nation. And how my school is going, so I attend Red Oak Public Schools in Oklahoma, and there's around 325 total students, K through 12. They start school in the next few weeks. They're offering online and in person. But for Red Oak, last spring, they had us doing our schoolwork online, and then also they would give like packets out if no one or someone could not access the internet or get on a computer. And the teachers were always available. They were super helpful. And Red Oak is just an amazing school. But being a singer, songwriter, performer, I had many book performances that were paid, and they either got canceled or rescheduled. But there were opportunities to train and learn through Zoom and do some performances during COVID, through Zoom. But so many opportunities were lost because of the COVID. But I'm sure everything will start to open back up, and I will get to sing and meet all of you guys. So, yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much. And we thank you for staying in school and doing what's best and being positive during this time, because it's a difficult time, but like I said, we show our resilience as Native people, and it's so this is why we wanted to open with you, because we really appreciate what you're doing, and we really thank you. I just want to tell everyone that after we speakers, we'll have time for questions, whether that be in the chat room or questions, I believe, verbally, audibly. So with that, I want to thank you again, Ava. We really appreciate it. And now,
Thank you so much.
I'm not sure I'm allowed to plug your CDs, but I would say definitely, folks, go to YouTube and see Ava.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate it. So we'll be in touch. And so we want you to engage in this conversation, after everyone speaks. So
and I did enter her YouTube link into the chat for anybody who wants to go see her music.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
So with that, I want to move on next to Michael Chamberlain. Michael's the Special Assistant for Rural Outreach at the Department of Education. And I'm really thankful for Michael for coming on today. He is, we've worked together now for several years. Michael was very instrumental in the Department of Ed and helping to work on the Tribal Broadband Summit that was held in September. And also he has a wealth of knowledge about the rural programs that the Department of Ed has. And a lot of people don't realize that we have rural programs that stretch out, across Indian country. And so Michael, with that, I'd like you to, say hello and introduce yourself.
Well, thanks, Ron. You would have to make me follow the highlight of the whole. So.
Well, you have to sing your presentation. That's the whole.
Well, I think everybody would leave at that point, so we'll give them that. And I definitely couldn't come anywhere close to Ava. So as Ron said, I'm the Special Assistant for Rural Outreach at the U.S. Department of Education. I've been in that role for about 3.5 years. And I grew up, we moved all around the country. But when we ended up in high school, I went to high school in rural Southeast Idaho. And as a matter of fact, graduated from the same high school my dad did. So after all that moving, we ended up right in the same place. I went to college in Utah, at Utah State University, and ended up in Nevada, and then moved out to DC a few years ago and have been working at the department. So home for me is Idaho, southeastern Idaho, and that's a picture from my mom's backyard behind me. So, and you can see the Grand Tetons in the corner there just above my shoulder. So that's really where home is for us. And so our roots are in rural, and we have a really real connection, our family does. And the resilience is something that's the theme of the conference, and rural resilience is really something that's important and something that they demonstrate on a continual basis, just to make things work for their students. And so, this is a great opportunity for that kind of resilience. The President Trump and Secretary DeVos and the Department of Education believe that students can and must continue to learn, and the best way for that to happen is for students to be in schools this fall. And such as Ava's school is going to be opening up with in-person instruction. If ever there was an essential business that must continue to operate right now, it's education. Our nation's future depends on it. And ultimately, it's not a matter of if schools need to open, it's a matter of how. And how that happens is best left to the education and community leaders, weighing, of course, the data and risks for their communities, the physical safety and health, mental health, and social emotional development of students. And the solutions are going to look different in states and even different within areas in the same state. School's going to look different in this fall than it has in the past, but this is an opportunity to come back stronger and more student focused. And the rural resilience is very important. The science supports getting students back in schools. The American Academy of Pediatrics says that it strongly advocates that all policy considerations for the coming school year should start with the goal of having students physically present in school. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has released detailed guidance for administrators of K-12 schools and childcare programs to ensure school officials understand how to prepare for, prevent transmission of, and react quickly to identified coronavirus cases within an education system. The CDC has also offered schools supplemental considerations on how to assess risks of in-person classes, class size, behaviors, and cleaning techniques, and provided guidance to help schools determine the necessity of conducting screenings, testing, and contact tracing. And there are many schools across the country, especially in rural areas, that are returning students to classrooms this fall, and some have already done so. And in many cases, and actually in most cases, it looks different than it has in years past. In an op-ed last week, the governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem, made a strong case for returning students to school in her state. And it's the state with among the highest percentage of Native students in the nation. And she cited studies that show that children are at far greater risk of critical illness from influenza than from COVID-19. And they're much less likely to transmit the virus to others. And she also addressed the harm that comes from keeping kids out of school and keeping them at home any longer than they already have. She mentioned the loss of human connections for many of these kids is driving increases in stress, anxiety, and depression, and especially for the most vulnerable students. She further pointed out that great disparities in remote learning and cited research that suggests that students return to the fall with roughly 70% of the learning gains that they would get in a typical school year in reading, and about 50% in math. Imagine missing essentially half a school year. And one of the large districts in South Dakota, she reported, they lost contact with as many as 30% of the students after going online. So a third of the students they couldn't even find, never were available for classes. In short, she concluded that not going back to school hurts much worse than returning. And we can't afford for our nation's students to lose ground. And for more than 30 years, the Secretary has talked about the need for everyone to rethink school, rethink education, and to expand options for students. And this is a moment that demands action and creativity and ingenuity and resilience to return students to the classroom. She recently announced a $15 million grant program called Accessing Choice in Education. And it empowers Native tribes to select an expanded range of resources that were previously unavailable to their students. So this is it's called the ACE grants, and it's geared toward Native students, and tribes are the applicants for the grants. And parents can choose from a variety of options, such as apprenticeships or Native language or history or culture courses or after-school programs, or many of a variety of additional services that students may not be able to get on their standard learning environment. And they're able to get those based upon the needs that the tribes identify in their communities. And families provide feedback on what's working and what isn't, so it can help shape the program going forward. And in addition, the Secretary reminds us that each student is an individual, a unique individual who learns differently and has different interests and aspirations. And that's one reason why she proposed a program called Education Freedom Scholarships. And these allow students to take advantage of a wide variety of education options that expand the opportunities that are available to them. Students can use scholarships under this proposal for a wide variety of education expenses. And it's not about choosing different school buildings. It's about choosing the options that make education work best for individual students. They can choose, they'd be able to choose advanced courses like AP courses or international baccalaureate courses, or additional electives like art or music or languages, or even native culture or history courses. They can use it for credit recovery or remedial courses or tutoring services. And Senator Tim Scott, and there's a wide variety of other uses that they could take advantage of the scholarships for. And Senator Tim Scott has included this proposal in a bill that he calls School Choice Now. And these tax credit scholarships empower students and families by ensuring they have the freedom to choose the education options that work for them. And the Secretary DeVos, the President and Vice President, they trust parents. They believe in students and believe that each student deserves the opportunity to go back to school this fall in the ways and the places that work best for them and their families. And you can find out more about the Education Freedom Scholarships at ed.gov/freedom. And bringing students back to schools, back to classrooms may be especially important for Native students who have some of the largest issues with connectivity. Ron mentioned we worked on the National Tribal Broadband Summit last fall, and we were able to bring about 200 people from across the country, business leaders and tribal leaders and education leaders, to discuss ways to help close some of the connectivity gaps in on Native lands in Indian country. And we worked with the Department of the Interior and the Institute for Museum and Library Services to put this together. So we're working to try to close those connectivity gaps, but there are probably greater gaps that exist for Native students than for any other group, or arguably any other group of students. That the Institute for Education Sciences back in April of 2018 issued a report called Student Access to Digital Learning Resources Outside the Classroom. It's also called the Homework Gap Report. And it indicated that rural students generally had more limited access to students in suburbs or cities or towns, with the exception of remote towns. And as the findings relate to the ability of American Indian and Alaska Native students to have the technological tools to be able to make digital learning work for them, the report didn't provide good news on that front. You know, just a little over 2/3 of Native children from 3 to 18 live in a household that had a desktop or laptop or notebook or netbook computer. And that's compared with over 90% of white students and over 95% of Asian students, and 3/4 of African American students and Hispanic students. And of those who use the internet anywhere, a higher percentage of Native children use the internet at school than any other group, but a lower percentage of Native students use the internet at home than any other group. Just 3/4 of Native 8th graders reported using a computer at home, and a smaller percentage of Native 8th graders reported having access to internet at home than any other group. So all of these statistics and these numbers point to the fact that it was extremely difficult for students, for Native students, probably more than any other group, to be connected and to take advantage of, or to be able to participate in the online and digital learning. I've talked to rural school leaders and leaders in areas with around tribal areas, and some of them, they weren't able to take advantage of digital learning at all last spring. And their entire instructional portfolio consisted of paper packets and handing those out to students. And so they put their students at a severe disadvantage. So that's one reason, one of the drivers of the National Tribal Broadband Summit last year. And there's good news, they're going to have another one. Yeah. This year they're planning a virtual summit from September 21st to 25th. And so remember those dates, and please please participate, and help close the connectivity gap for Native students. and the administration and department are working to help communities close the connectivity gaps, but that doesn't diminish the need for students to get back into the classrooms. As our experience this spring has shown, even in places where students have the technological tools for online learning, the forced widespread virtual instruction was, and I spoke to a superintendent in Virginia, he told his families that the online experience was going to be and is an inferior product to the in-class learning. And so we can't afford to have students forced into that position. And unfortunately, in too many cases, the children who struggled the most with online learning were the students who could least afford it. Right. So as the schools closed during the school year last year, and the department acted quickly to get funding out from the CARES Act and get it to right. the schools and the students as they were able to. In April, the secretary announced $1.4 billion in funding to minority serving institutions, including tribally controlled colleges and universities, as well as institutions serving low-income students. And that funding came from the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund that was in the CARES Act that President Trump signed. And in addition, the department's allocated $153 million to BIE, the Education Stabilization Fund in the CARES Act. And they also provided $69 million for education-related needs to the Bureau of Indian Education through the Department of the Interior, and 20 million of that went to tribal colleges. And so that's just some of the work that we've done lately at the department to try to help get through this pandemic area, and again, stressing the need for students to get back into the environment where they learn best, where their social, emotional, and health needs can be taken care of, which is back into classrooms. And thank you again, Ron. Thank you for Global Minded. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me here. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. One of the things that within the department I noticed this year, when we went from pre-corona virus into the coronavirus, that the minds were turning and wheels were turning about how we can make it seamless to get into not so much classroom, but funding, that we were able to come together and put that together. So I know that's much appreciated by a lot of the recipients. Well, thank you very much, and we'll be Michael will be available for questions. I did want to mention one thing. I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to Bureau of Indian Education, Tony Dearman, who's the director. Tony was hoping to be with us today, but he wasn't able to. But I just wanted to mention Tony and mention BIE. But next, a very special person to all of us is Diana Cournoyer. Diana is, like I mentioned, she's the executive director of the National Indian Education Association. And I personally want to thank her, because we have, for several years now, with BIE and Administration for Native Americans, we've had the MOA on preservation and revitalization of native languages. And that's something that we held last year at NIEA, and it was really successful. And looking forward to doing that this year virtually with NIEA. And it's grown from probably 50 people attending to 300 people or more. So thank you, Diana, and please go ahead.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good, thank you. Yes, Diana Cournoyer, Oglala, Sioux, originally from Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. That's where I call home. I live in Oklahoma City right now. I go back and forth between Washington, D.C., our D.C. office, and we have an Oklahoma City program office. Since the pandemic, I've been in Oklahoma City with my family, and just been like everyone else on this call, and everyone else that Michael spoke about, really just trying to figure out how to respond, how to respond to educational needs during a pandemic, but also how to respond to trauma, how to respond to community members. What is NIEA's space now? We are 51 years old, and we've been an advocacy policy force and influential association for a long time. But now we need to start transitioning and thinking about how do we respond to what is necessary in addition to what policy and advocacy is going on the Hill. So we have a program team now, and we do outreach, we do trainings and webinars and lots of partnerships across federal agencies as well as other associations. I want to start off by responding to what Michael spoke about, but then also go into what NIEA is doing and some of the things that we're hearing in the community. I understand that getting students back into the school emotionally and mentally is necessary. I understand that from a research standpoint. I understand that from therapy and a counseling background. I understand that as far as the learning curve. What I don't agree with, and I think a lot of our communities agree too, is that as sovereign nations, as small, very small communities that have populations of, some of our communities have populations of less than 500 people. If we are to return to school and 1 or 2 or 10 people are infected, that could devastate a whole community. So that's something that we have to consider as Native people that are opening our schools back up. Yes, we agree that socially and emotionally and academically, it is the best place for our students to be. But we do have to consider first and foremost, not just the health of 1 or 2 or 10 students or the health of a teacher, but we have to consider the health of our communities. So I'm from Pine Ridge. I'm from South Dakota. I know Kristi Noem, not personally, but I can tell you I know her intimately. And I don't believe that when she makes blanket statements, it should not be taken to heart, because our communities very much have the right to say, yes, we hear you, we understand, we agree the economy needs X, Y, and Z, but our people's health, physical health, really needs to also be a part of the conversation. And I know she's talking about the whole state, and I know the president and DeVos are talking about all the nation, but when we look at a pueblo that has 600 people that are mostly over that 65 age or 55, whatever that age range is, we have got to consider that our vulnerable populations, where our children are going to school and bringing back the virus into the home, has to be something that's top of mind prior to or even before we start thinking about the education of our students. So that's what NIEA has to think about. When we talk about what do we support? We do support education, we do support social emotional learning, but we also have to consider the health of a whole community of people so that the community can thrive, so that the tribe can go on and live. So that's my first, I just wanted to put that out there, not negative or being aggressive or confrontational, but I just wanted to say from NIEA's viewpoint and standpoint, this is what we do have to consider. Something else that we need to consider is thinking about what our educational systems, not just Native education, but what did our educational systems look like before the pandemic? We had trauma. Social emotional learning was not being addressed nationally, not in every school. It wasn't a requirement. Poverty, socioeconomic status, factors, risk factors, and issues were not being addressed. This pandemic is like a layer of onion. It's being, all our challenges and our issues are being pulled back and magnified. because of issues that were not addressed prior to the pandemic. Access, internet access should have been addressed, Donna, many, many years ago. I've been working at NIA for 7 years. Internet access and broadband has been a conversation that I've had for 7 years. It was a conversation that people had in my community long before then. So why wasn't it addressed before a pandemic? Why does it take a crisis for whether it's a state agency or a federal agency to address these issues, not just for Indian country, but for all communities? Why does it take a pandemic for anyone to think about the trauma that our students suffer with when they go home? And what do they come back with at school? Why does it take a pandemic for anyone to talk about special education students and the services that they are not getting even before a pandemic? The services that our tribally controlled schools and our bureau operated schools don't have the resources to support some of our students with special needs, with some of those more severe special needs, like autism and like Downs. I live, like I said, in a rural, very rural, isolated community. Or that's where my family is still at. And if you are autistic, severe autistic or Downs, or have a severe mental problem, you might have services, might. You won't, it's not a guarantee as if you were in a public school in a city. But the pandemic is shining a light on this need, which is a shame. Why does it take a pandemic for us to get attention?
Right.
Why does it take a pandemic for anyone to have a panel like this or a convening like this to talk about the inequities that exist in our schools? And I'm not just talking about our reservation schools. I'm talking about our public schools that serve our students. I'm talking about schools that are in rural and isolated communities, not serving Native students, but just in rural populations. The inequities that those students suffer with as well. Those inequities, those gaps are growing every day, like Michael said, every day. And when they return, whether it's a face-to-face system, every day, every other day, online, how are we going to address those gaps? Because the gaps are huge.
Yes.
And the conversation has never been a solution. Every panel I've been on, every interview that I've done in the last 6 months is talking about the impact, but I have not heard anyone talk about solutions. So NIEA is trying, in a very small, we have a staff of 10. We're trying to provide solutions, and our solutions right now are resources and tools. But we are a staff of 10 who can't travel, who have to use the internet. When we just talked about we don't have access, we don't have this collective access to resources. So how are we going to solve these problems? And it's not just one organization, and it's not just one agency, but it has to be all of us working together to provide these solutions and working collaboratively, not just one agency, federal agency, state agency, saying this is the answer, because none of us have the answers, or we wouldn't be in this position right now if it was one person, one agency who had the answers. So this is what I'm faced with, not just as the ED, but this is what I'm faced with as a parent. My daughter is learning online, and my daughter's very successful learning online. She's a very unique student. She's lived in many different states. She's went to many different schools because of my job, and she's had to figure out how to be flexible. And so she's having to learn online. She finished her 10th grade year online, and she's going to start 11th grade online. Whether she likes it or not, that's our reality right now. But she's blessed and special in that learning online doesn't challenge her. She actually likes it. And I think there are a lot of students, Native or not Native, that might thrive learning online if they have the internet access. because they're afraid, they're traumatized for some reason, something going on in their life, and going to school might be scary, might be intimidating. So there are places and people, students, who are thriving while they're learning online. My final words, and I want to make sure that everybody has time, but my final statement is we also need to look at the inefficiencies of our teaching staff, of our faculty. Name me a teacher prep program, name me a teacher who went through a digital learning class. That doesn't usually exist. We're looking at teachers that are veteran teachers, anywhere from 7 to 20 plus years in the teaching corps. And those teachers are telling us, calling NIEA for help, because they didn't learn how to teach online. They didn't learn how to teach digitally. They learned in a teacher-centered pedagogy. The teacher is the knowledge keeper. They deliver the knowledge. A digital learning platform or pedagogy is requiring it to be student-centered, student-based inquiry, project-based learning, community-based learning. These are progressive ways of teaching. These don't necessarily exist in our teacher prep programs, which are most often, I don't want to call them generic, but they're basic and they come from a teacher-centered pedagogy. And that's not wrong and that's not incorrect. But what we're asking teachers to do is so unique and special right now. Whether it be a combination of hybrid, online and face-to-face, or all online, teachers are scared. Teachers are worried that they're going to lose students. So we're trying to be responsive and create a training to help teachers quickly transition and learn some strategies to transition to teacher, student-centered and inquiry-based. But that's another inequity that I haven't heard a lot of folks talk about in the education world, that our teachers are also petrified. Some of them are quitting, retiring early, or just afraid to return back to school. So how are we supporting them as well as parents that are going to have to stay home or figure out how to teach their kids online? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Diana. You know, it made me think of a couple of things. One is, you know, our students, we have the highest suicide rate amongst all people. So this pandemic comes on top of lots of barriers in our, you know, in our communities, including, you know, the inadequate funding. You know, Indian Health Service is years behind, and that's in many cases our only funding, and they've only in just the last few years started looking at behavioral health issues. But the one thing I wanted to mention to those is that that some of these, that this comes from the treaties, as treaty and trust responsibility, that through treaties, education and healthcare are two of the things, along with some other things. But in exchange for what our people gave up, that the sovereignty and the trust responsibility, it's different. It's not that it's another child in poverty or another minority population isn't having difficult times, but we have we also have a hierarchy of tribal leaders and or, you know, things within our tribes as I don't say members of tribes, I say as citizens of sovereign nations, that our young people, you know, right from the beginning, they have a lot of issues. And we spend a lot of time, as I know you do, emphasizing culture and tradition and language, because that's our identity, it's their identity. And to be proud of that and be proud to be American Indian or Alaska Native is really important. Yeah, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that, and I'm sure we'll have several questions after. And then next, my dear friend, Carrie Billy is the President and CEO of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. So Carrie, thank you again for being with us today, and it's all yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Ken.
Yep. Okay. Yate, Beladana Nishni, Oni Bashashan, Dashashek, Ani Dashanali. I am Carrie Billy, the president and CEO of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, or AHEC. And I'd like to first thank all the previous speakers, really great, and singing and speaking, really wonderful performances, and words that you said, especially Diana. We look forward to continue working with you and Ron and Michael, everyone, but really heartfelt comments, Diana. So thank you very much for that. And I would like to pick up on some of Diana's comments and then give you some kind of real life examples from the tribal college perspective of some of the things she mentioned. So tribally chartered colleges and universities are geographically isolated, and most are severely under-resourced, as Diana was talking, particularly when you compare them to other institutions of higher education. Yet our institutions are extraordinarily effective. The nation's 37 tribal colleges serve more than 160,000 American Indians, Alaska Natives, and other rural community residents each year through academic and community-based programs at more than 75 sites in 16 states. Tribal colleges, like most rural community colleges, are open-door institutions. But our colleges were established for two specific reasons. First, the near complete failure of the American higher education system to address the needs of or even include American Indians. And then the second, the need to preserve our culture, our languages, our lands, our sovereignty, our past and our future. The vision of all tribal colleges is to build our own education systems founded on our ways of knowing, traditional knowledge, spirituality, and designed specifically to serve and strengthen our tribes, our communities, our families, and our lands. So in early March of this year, tribal colleges were busy trying to work toward that vision in an already challenging environment. And these are some points of that environment. TCUs were operating with very lean budgets because their operating funding, which comes from the federal government, is inadequate. The only other minority serving institution that receives its operating funding from the federal government, Howard University, receives about $30,000 per student each year. Tribal colleges, most tribal colleges receive only $7,300 per Indian student each year. That's a difference of nearly $23,000 a year per student. TCUs educate students in great need, as Diana was saying. More than half of our students are first-generation students. A third are single with parents or with children. Many live in multi-generational homes with deep community ties and responsibilities, and 86% of our students receive maximum Pell benefits. Our students, faculty, and staff face serious health and safety risks, including food and housing insecurity, homelessness, and the vast majority of tribal college students, faculty, and staff are American Indian, or Alaska Native, so we are at much greater risk for contracting COVID-19 than the rest of the US population. In terms of IT infrastructure, TCUs have the slowest and most expensive internet access of any institutions of higher education in this country. Ilisavik College, for example, which is in Barrow, Alaska, pays $250,000 a year for internet speeds of 6 megabits per second. 16 TCUs have internet speeds of 100 megabits or less, and 4 are below 50 megabits per second. This was pre-COVID in March. And even those TCUs with adequate internet access on campus face problems delivering classes remotely to students across our reservation. At some tribal colleges, more than half the students lack internet access, consistent, reliable, and affordable internet access at home, and many students lack the equipment necessary to engage in online coursework. Richard Littlebear at Chief Dull Knife College in Montana describes a problem like this. He says he can use his cell phone to make a call from Hawaii to Lame Deer, Montana, but he can't use his cell phone to make a call from Lame Deer to Busby. There's no cellular service, and without cellular, there is no internet. So Oahu is 3,300 miles from Lame Deer and the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Montana. The distance between the reservation communities of Lame Deer and Busby is 16 miles. So that was our world in March 2020, and then the pandemic. Our challenges have grown exponentially. Yet tribal colleges are committed to serving their tribal nations. That has never wavered. So since mid-March, the 37 tribal colleges have worked diligently to respond to the pandemic, addressing both the needs of the students and their communities. Most tribal colleges have not closed at any point during the pandemic, and those that did cease operations did so only for a few weeks. We went from zero, at some tribal colleges, 0 online courses to 90 or 100% online in 2 weeks this spring. Tribal colleges are working and learning together to open safely in the fall, always mindful, as Diana said, of the need to put first the health and safety of their students, families, and communities. This is important for the health and access reasons that I just mentioned, but also because many of our tribes, for many of them, our tribal language keepers are well over 70 years of age, which is another adverse COVID-19 factor. If native language keepers are lost in this pandemic, whole tribal cultures could be devastated. So tribal colleges are focused on building their online teaching capacity and delivering courses safely for all. In fact, we have about more than 300 tribal college faculty right now finishing a 6 weeks training course in being an effective online teacher, so they're ready for the fall. Sandra Boham, who's the president of Salish Kootenai College in Montana, describes the situation at her college like this. She says, SKC is working with our K-12 students to educate all Indian students in our region to meet their educational, technological, and mental health needs. SKC adopted a shelter-in-place policy on March 16th. They kept family and student housing open to the maximum extent possible because they could not disrupt families during the pandemic. She says that many of their children and many of their students are parents, and they quickly realized that these parents were forced to become full-time teachers at the same time that they're college students. So SKC established a computer loan program for students, faculty, and staff. Assistance was provided for food so students could continue to feed their families without having to leave college, drop out of school, and go to work. Activity kits were developed and provided to families to assist in keeping children busy while parents could attend to their classwork. And faculty and students in SKC's teacher education program offered parental assistance tips for teaching at home. Faculty flexed their course schedules to find times that worked for students to meet virtually outside of normal class hours. And the SKC IT technicians provided assistance to students on their personal laptops and their phones to help address problems as they also worked to improve internet access on campus, because so many TCU students were using the college's campus-based wireless internet system to do their coursework from their cars in the college's parking lot. SKC, like many TCUs, has about 67% of students who are at high risk mental health status categories. So the college is taking additional steps to help keep students mentally and physically well. SKC extended the spring and summer terms to allow for physically distanced hands-on learning, and they're providing holistic support to students and instructors. Fort Peck Community College, which is also in Montana, is putting together a plan to add a mental and health, spiritual, and cultural counselor and liaison to their college for the fall, who will work with students to maintain their mental health while attending college during the pandemic. This person will also help students and provide opportunities for cultural services like naming ceremonies, prayer and smudging, sweats, and cultural identity and healthy lifestyle tips. Because helping students meet their critical cultural and lifestyle needs is so important. Healthy students, as Diana was saying, are successful students. So we need to do everything we can. Early in the pandemic, President Monty Russell at Diné College said that his tribal college is serving a nation that has been knocked down. Diné College, like all the tribal colleges, quickly transitioned to online learning, began providing students with emergency financial assistance, both from funding under the CARES Act and from the American Indian College Fund. And Diné College and Navajo Technical University, their staff risked their own health to keep their college doors open. Like many other TCUs, they kept some dorms open for students who could not safely live at home, or who did not have a home to go to. Their cafeteria staff provided free meals to first responders as well as students who would, like the SKC students, sit for hours in their college's parking lot to access the internet to do their coursework. And just FYI, the average age of faculty at Diné College is 65. So they're grappling with that as they go into the fall. NTU, which is located in Crown Point, New Mexico, significantly expanded its online messaging to students through Facebook and other social media, providing tips, encouragements, and other outreach to keep students engaged as they were practicing physically distancing. The college worked with the Navajo Nation and IT providers to establish wireless internet hotspots on the eastern part of the Navajo Nation. And they also converted a fleet of college vans into what they called the Homework Express, which delivered printed assignments to students who lacked internet access, and then picked up those assignments and brought them back to campus. NTU also quickly transitioned its summer enrichment camps for the community to virtual camps, including a 6-week STEM skill building program for dual credit or high school students, and its high school, middle school robotics academy, which it offers with support from NASA to Native youth in their community. At Bay Mills Community College, which is in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, faculty and staff developed online tutoring opportunities for students, organized the BMCC cyber social hours so students could come together over Zoom to talk to one another, and they launched a multi-week mental health power hour, just doing what they could as quickly as possible to address the variety of needs of their students. Faculty and staff at Chandusca-Chicana Community College on the Spirit Lake Dakota Reservation in North Dakota they're meeting students in parking lots, at grocery stores, at the gas station to give them a laptop or a card to get phone minutes, because their students are trying to do their college homework on track phones, says their president, Cynthia Lindquist. Like most TCUs, Chandusca is also continuing to serve the broader tribal community. Their administrators work with their tribe to provide COVID-19 testing in the college parking lot, while even the president herself delivers meals, food, and supplies to tribal members in need. BMCC, Chandusca, and NTU are using their 3D printers, which are normally reserved for their advanced manufacturing instruction, to provide hundreds of face shields to tribal and regional health care providers and first responders. Now, as more things are opening up in their community, they're providing face shields to local businesses to help keep their workers as safe as possible. BMCC also made valves for ventilators for use in local hospitals. Overall, the tribal college students who have been able to access the internet and who received a laptop or smartphone from their college appear to be adapting to the new normal, I think similarly with Diana's daughter. But none of the tribal colleges have been able to reach all of our students. Some, primarily those living on our vast areas of our reservation where there is no internet access, have been lost to their tribal college. TCUs haven't been able to locate all the students who were enrolled in attending class in spring 2020 prior to the pandemic, and they don't know the extent to which enrollment will decline in the fall, even if they offer classes online, whether they offer the classes online or in person. Because ultimately, the lack of widespread and affordable internet access in Indian country remains a serious barrier that tribal colleges and our K-12 schools alone cannot address. It requires a comprehensive, multi-agency, multi-governmental and community-based approach, a decision-making approach. So, although most of the tribal colleges moved to online or distance education programs for spring 2020, the landscape does look slightly different for the fall. We have been able to use some of the COVID money to address some of the challenges tribal colleges have been facing, so we really appreciate that support from the Department of Education and Interior. Right now, 25 tribal colleges have offered announced their plans for the fall. 17 will open with a hybrid class schedule, most of the classes being online, others being offered with physical distancing, particularly career and technical. 7 will open with online classes only, and 1 is planning to open with face-to-face classes. It will be a challenge, and every day we discover new challenges, but tribal colleges are committed to achieving their vision of strong sovereign nations through excellence in tribal higher education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. That I think hopefully we've painted a picture today, just briefly, of what is happening, what's and like Diana said, we need some solutions, and that, like Carrie said, it's going to take everyone. Ava, I think we've given you a lot of material to write lots of songs for us. We, I think the thing that affects me, and this was, you know, as Carol mentioned, I'm a sun dancer. This was the first time in over 25 years that I didn't get to go to Sundance. And I've been there before, and you know, for 25 years, but we had a lot of young people that were just starting their commitment that were not able to go this year. And so maintaining our culture, our traditions, our powwows, or those kinds of things, it's also something is missing now. And it's, you know, we want to get back to that as soon as can. That's hard to do virtually, you know? But so anyway, I want to thank everyone. I think, Lisa, if I can go back to you, we have questions for our guests.
Yes, I didn't see too many questions. There's one, it says, talking about wonderful programs, and will many of them provide students the option to participate virtually? And I think that was in relation to, go back up here. I think that was to Michael's. So Michael, you know, you're talking about the different programs and then I guess just, you know, virtual options.
Yeah, I was, I believe this may have been talking about the ACE program. And if I understand correctly, that a lot of that would be up to the tribes who participate in the program to be able to design these programs, like I say, when I was originally doing it to find what works best in their communities and to reflect the programs that are going to be important in their communities. So ultimately that may come to that decision on whether these would be available online would be up to the grantee or the recipient of the grant to be able to design the program to cover whatever model of instruction that they wanted to, whether it be in face-to-face or additionally add some online components and something to suit what the needs of the tribal communities as they determine and the needs of the students.
That's important. There's some flexibility, don't you guys think? That's nice that you'll get to decide.
Yeah. I think
and please go ahead and put your questions in, just questions you have, put them in the chat and we can, and if you want to address them to a specific person, put that too.
And Carol, did you have any questions or comments for our guests? Well, we have them now, so.
Well, I just want to say, you know, what an amazing group of people. And I think that one of the things that everybody touched on is that this is a time that takes on common collaborators, and we cannot move these major levers that frankly were really serious before the pandemic, and now they're amplified. And so I think the more we can identify very concrete steps, like Diana was saying, there's a lot of people that are talking about things, but we really have to move to, you know, what is an agenda that we can all agree to and move through to support the teachers, to support the students, to support the single parents, the people who are raising their own kids as they're getting their degrees, and then the communities that are made up of the wisdom keepers and the elders and a lot of the people that are holding the space right now for those people that are so stretched out themselves. So I think, you know, for Global Minded, we look at, you know, people like Janet Katz on the health side. You know, there's a lot of people who are in supporting roles, and all of those people need to be at the table, because you can't learn if you're not healthy, and you can't work if you're not healthy, and all these things are intertwined. So, yeah.
Do any of, so Carrie, Michael, Diana, Ava, do you have any other you'd like to add? And before we move to some other questions? Because we have time, so please feel free if you want to make any additional comments right now. So. Okay.
Question for Michael. Michael, you're very popular today. So question from Janet Katz. What increased resources are anticipated for schools to cover the increased complexity of the pandemic education environment?
Well, in the CARES Act, there was, for education, there was nearly $31 billion made available that went through the Department of Education. That about half of that, about, I believe, 13 million of that went to institutions of higher education, some of which was directed as direct grants to students to cover some of the additional costs that they had. The rest went to the institutions themselves. About $13 billion went to states and state education agencies, including BIE, and that would be distributed to the local school districts, and also the state education agencies could apologize for that. And the state education agencies could, they can take up to 10% or up to 10% of that money, and they can design programs that they can distribute the money to schools or however. And then there was $3 billion that was distributed to governors it's called the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. And governors have wide discretion in how they distribute that money to design scholarship programs for students. They can give it to, they can hand out discretionary grant programs. They can allocate the money to institutions of higher education. There are a broad range of uses that governors are putting that money to use for. In many states, they are addressing some of the connectivity issues within their state, whether it be increased internet access in rural areas or purchasing and distributing hotspots or devices to students who lack them. And so there's that money in addition that the governors were given, the state was given funds from what's called the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And so they were able to use that money. Some of them used it for, are using it for areas in health. And a lot of governors are choosing to allocate some of that money for additional education resources. In Colorado, for instance, they're helping to buy PPE for teachers and staff in public and public charter schools and private schools. Teachers are able to have the PPE that they would need to comply with the state's guidelines for getting students back into school. In New Hampshire, they're using some of the money to expand internet access to some of the rural areas that don't have it. Those are just a couple examples of what the states are doing with the funding that they've received from the federal government. And the main bulk of the funds that went through to the K-12 education will go directly or through the state education agency, but to districts. And those are allocated through the Title I formula. So those districts will have additional funds that they can dedicate to, a wide variety of purposes, including some of the additional expenses they may have had in dealing with the pandemic, or on some of the additional costs that they may have in the next year going forward that are related to the pandemic. So I hope that kind of helps cover, and those are the resources available so far through the through the CARES Act.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because you were talking about the internet. And so there's a question, is there government funding that supports satellite internet in the rural areas of our country?
Well, other than, well, there's the E-rate program that supports wired internet, but other than that, I think that any of the other government programs that may provide funding for internet, there are not dependent on the type. So if they were funding, say, one of the governors use the funding to expand internet access in their rural areas, they could use that for satellite or fiber or the white space or whatever solution they determined would be the best for that situation, because what works in one area may not necessarily work in another. It may not be feasible to dig trenches and run fiber optics through really mountainous areas, but there may be another solution. So generally the funding would be solution independent, and it would just be determined on who was supplying it and whether it was from the governor or whatever, and how they determined that they thought those solutions might work in a particular area.
Well, thank you, Mike. That's really helpful.
Yeah, and I do know, for several years we've talked about the last mile, which is from the connectivity coming up to sovereign land, and then who pays for it, who works with it. But the other thing is that in order to do that, tribal consultation has to take place between the tribes and the state and other people that need to be at the table. And that sometimes has been a barrier, where we haven't gotten that far to where they've consulted on how it can bring it. Some folks have, but it's an issue that has been ongoing. Like Diana said, we've talked about that for years, and the solution may have to come from private enterprise and tribes, or something like that. I don't know, but certainly that discussion has to continue, and tribal consultation needs to be in that.
And I know that at the National Tribal Broadband Summit last fall, that there were several panels that were devoted to how to make some of these discussions happen, to be able to overcome some of the barriers that may not be so easily overcome, whether it's regulatory or whether it's a matter of tribal consultation and some of the steps that need to be taken to make sure that those things work in the proper way. And there was a lot of discussion about how people are trying to work together to make sure that they can cover all those steps properly, and that they to continue to move forward and increase the access that families and students and the communities have.
Thank you, Mike.
Well,
You had a question for Ava. Do you want to just ask her?
Were you asking me?
Yeah, didn't you have a question for Ava?
Yeah. One of the things, Ava, I do have a question, because this is something that tribal colleges have wondered about. When everyone basically went to online learning in the spring, it was difficult, but it wasn't as difficult as it could have been, because we started the semester and the year in person. So it was just finishing up those last few weeks online. But what we're wondering is how, from a student's perspective, do you think it'll be different in the fall, because it's going to start online? And so you won't have that, class community spirit built up. So that's basically what I'm wondering. What do you think, it's going to be more challenging, or
Well,
how do you feel about that?
I think that my school is very supportive, and they are going to do online. They're going to do some Zooms, I'm sure, and the teacher said that they will always be available. but I know that it won't be the same as being in the class, because I think I'm just going to go ahead and do the online because of my singing, and it's really hard to be at school as I do my singing and stuff. So I think that it will be challenging just because I don't have also my friends too. And so, but I think my parents will probably help me. So, yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, well, any other questions? And maybe if there are, you can put them in the chat, and we probably should wrap up, but I want to let people know that this will be captured. Lisa recorded this, and so by tonight, this will be posted on our YouTube channel, and you can share that liberally with, hopefully, Carrie, all the different tribal colleges and just a lot of other people who it would be easier for them to watch it in their own time with all that they're managing right now. We also, have a newsletter, and I would really love to feature, you, Ava, and many of the people that Diana and Michael and Carrie and Ron all talked about today, because we need to have broader voices understood widely, and our newsletter is read by between 10 and 12,000 people a day, and is filled with a lot of role models that people need at a time like this, so that they can be inspired and persist through the challenges that they're facing. So, but on that note, I just want to thank you all, and then I want to share that tomorrow we have another session, and it's a good lead-in. It's tomorrow at 12 o'clock Eastern Time, and JC will be leading that panel. It's called Native American Business Opportunities, Tribal Economic Development, and Post-Secondary Education and Workforce Participation. And JC has Melvin Monette from Indigenous Education, who we met through Ron, so thank you for connecting us there. And Don Kellen, who is the president of Fox Professional Services and the Rocky Mountain Indian Chamber of Commerce. And then Matt Ratananan, who I met about 5 years ago and is a wonderful leader. He's the Director of Technology for the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association, and also leader of the Tribal Digital Village Network Initiative. So I think it'll be another really interesting and high impact session through which we can really have an agenda for these leaders to be able to operationalize some of the different things that have been raised into real deliverables. So thank you so much, and we'll see any other questions, and hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow. And if you can't join for any reason tomorrow, we hope that you can revisit that with our YouTube. And then we are all looking forward to continuing to play Ava's songs and just watch her progress. And we hope we see all of you in person with our vaccinations next June or July here in Denver.
Yes.
And we just look forward to continuing to supporting the good work that you are all doing. So Michael and Carrie and Diana and Ron and Lisa, JC and Ava, thank you so much for making this a priority and for your inclusive leadership. And we look forward to really galvanizing all the things we can at this moment in time going forward. So thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very
Carol.
much.
It's a great
Thank
session.
Take care, guys.
Thank you, Lisa.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And we'll
Be
see you
safe.
tomorrow.